everyone, and welcome to our Return to Learn Social Studies meeting. We're just going to give a few minutes for people to come on in and join us. So if you wouldn't mind, in the chat box, if you would put your name and where you teach, that'll kind of help us know where you're from. And if you want to put a COVID silver lining in our chat box, something that's happened that is pretty good, even though we're stuck at home. And I could tell you mine is that I've had my 2 college-age kids home for a lot longer than I would have had them. And so we've had a great time being together, and I've spent a lot of time with them. I don't know if they're excited about it, but I got probably an extra 2 to 3 months with them. So that was something that came in. I have a friend in Arkansas who's a colleague of ours that started gardening. So that's her new hobby for COVID. And she's got all kinds of wonderful vegetables on Facebook all the time. Oh, so Tracy from Lawton. Nice to see you. We're going to get started in just a minute. And Jason's going to admit people for me as we go. And this is being recorded, so if you miss something, it'll be posted pretty quick after we're done. And I'm going to share my screen. We hope. We've been having virtual meetings pretty much since March, and so we have a running agenda. And so if you look at the very top of this document, and I will try to dump that in the chat box here. That's our running meeting notes that we've been doing since March. And so every thing that we've shared, every digital tool we've talked about, every sample lesson that someone has shared with us is all on this document. So it just kind of goes at the very end of it's the first meeting, and this is the last meeting. So I went ahead and kept this one, even though it's a special meeting, on this particular agenda. So that tiny URL link will get you to this meeting. If you forget down the road where to find the things we're going to look at today, you can always go to that. I'm Brenda Beamer Chapman, Director of Social Studies, and I have a couple people on the call with me today from this SDE. So my ELA friends are with us today. So Jason, if you would give us a wave. Jason is secondary ELA, and Deb Wade, if she'll give you a wave. Deb is elementary ELA, and I believe we even have Sherry Cornelius. If she's on already, if she waves, she's with our Javits grant. So I thank them for helping out today. One of the things we found out in our 3 through 5 meeting we were talking about is not everyone necessarily has been using Zoom. There's lots of platforms out there. And so we've been using Zoom for our meetings. So I thought I'd put kind of some little Zoom information just to get started. And you can use this with your students if you're going to use Zoom with your students and they haven't used it before, or your parents if you want to have a parent meeting on Zoom and they've not used this before. Usually we ask participants to mute their microphone when we're all talking, and you can do that by, if you look at your bar at the bottom, there should be a microphone icon. If it's got a little slash through it, it means it's that you're muted so that no one hears your extra noise going on. If it's not with an X through it, if it's looks like just a regular icon, then that means you're live. That comes in handy when you're trying to talk to people that walk into your shot sometimes. If you mute, then the other people can't hear it. There's also a camera icon on that same bar where you can stop or start your video if you want to have your video shown or not. And you can also change your virtual background on that particular icon if you click on the arrow and you have a picture saved on your computer. And so if you're working with students, this might be a cool way to get to know them, and you can show them how to do that. And then they can have what they want behind them on their background. If you click on the participant, you'll have controls that you'll see yes. If we ask you a question, you say yes or no. You can also rename yourself by clicking up there. There's also a chat icon on the control bar that gets you to the chat box where you can participate or see others. And if you want to save the chat, because people put links in there like I just did, then there's a 3-dot icon that you can click on and save the chat. So those are just things that might help you out. And our wonderful and talented Karen Leonard, who's our tech computer science director, but also our tech friend for all of us these days at the State Department, has made just a really quick 2-minute video. And that's what this link is. It says Zoom instructions. So if you have to have a parent meeting or a student meeting and you kind of want to talk about the Zoom instructions, that's a great little 2-minute, very quick and easy instructions about using Zoom. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at today is our Return to Learn and launching instruction for social studies. The first link is to the big page that if you want to see Jason's document for secondary ELA or the 3 through 5 document, they're all listed there. This link will get you to the social studies Return to Learn. And this is what it looks like. If you notice at the very top of the page, that will take you back to that main page if you want to see other grades or other subjects that are up on that. Let's look at the table of contents to start. If you notice, there's kind of 4 sections. There's the questions to consider while planning instruction. And if you notice that there's several places in that for standards and pacing, effective instructional routines, blended or distance learning, classroom assessment, connections and integration with other disciplines, social and emotional well-being, and equity and inclusion. So all of those are things that will be considered while we're planning for instruction. Then we have safety considerations. We have ongoing support for instruction, and then contact information. So that's what our table of contents looks like. As we start with the introduction, if you notice, this is merely a guidance document. It's resources for you. It's ideas for you to think about. It's not a directive or a limitation to what you're doing at your district. Your district's going to have a plan. Your school's going to have a plan. This is just guidance and resources and things for you to come back to if you need to find a different way to do something. So keep that in mind. These are just ideas for you to consider. There's also a survey if you would like to give us feedback on what's here or something that you think you need now. You can click on that survey and give us feedback and certainly give us ideas for things we might need. So we're going to be kind of just going through a few of these for the time that we have. If you have a question, we have a small number today. If you have a question, you can certainly put it in the chat box, and I have a few people are kind of watching that with me. Or if you want to unmute and ask us a question, you could do that too. But if you put it in the chat box, we can try to help you out. The first place we're going to look at is questions to consider while planning for instruction. And if you notice, we're going to focus on opportunities for learning rather than focusing on learning gaps. So we all know that, you know, things happen quick, and we all were at home very quickly in March, and we were just trying to give students things that they could work with to maintain their skills and maybe not introducing new instruction. We don't want to just stop and reteach all the things that we think they have missed, because we just won't be able to do that. We want to start on grade level material and focus on opportunities for learning. And we just have to consider you might need supports for some of these topics that you're using, because your students might not have as much experience now that they didn't get to do that in person at the end of the school year. And so what we want to think about is opportunities for learning, and maybe the idea that they're going to need support. So what that means is we kind of need to know what the key concepts were for our grade, but maybe the grade in front of us, so that we know what it is they might be missing. And one of the places we can do that is the social studies frameworks, because it shows the key concepts. And if you click on the social studies frameworks, this is the document it looks like. And I know that we have just a few people on here, But if you're familiar with the frameworks, could you go to your participant box and click yes, so I know if you've looked through these or not? And if you're not familiar, would you click no, so I could kind of know if you haven't seen these before, and that'll kind of give me an idea. It's good to see all of my State Department people have looked through the framework center and are confident. It looks like we're confident in the framework, so I won't go through all of the frameworks, but when you go to a grade level, there's a key concept box. And when you see that key concept box, that's what you want to look at. So if I'm an 8th grade teacher and I want to see maybe what 6th and 7th grade we're doing, I could go and look in those key concept box. One thing I did want to show before I leave the frameworks, on this first landing page, there is a link that some people forget to look at, and I think it's really, really important. Strategies for reinforcing the social studies practices. And when you click on that, it is a live binder, which is like an online file cabinet of all kinds of strategies. And we're going to be talking about a few of these later. But I wanted you to kind of see where those would be located if you wanted to look for more ones than what I have suggested. So when you look on that particular one, you're going to find all kinds of strategies, some that we're going to be looking at. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Return to Learn document. Once again, we want to start with on grade level material. We want to give extra support when we know they haven't had as much experience doing this. And we also want to think about bundling. In social studies, there's lots of chances to bundle your objectives and work smarter, not harder. And this is also a perfect place to bring in those practices, those social studies practices. And then we have all kinds of skills, including the reading and writing supports that are great to bundle in here. And so social studies is full of places to bundle your literacy things, and maybe even work with your ELA teachers if you're in a position to do that. A great place to bundle that. Another idea for bundling is civics. Civics concepts can pretty much go into any subject, whether you're doing geography or a history class or a government class. There's always a civics component, and all of those can be bundled where you're not teaching those out of context. You can teach those with the topic that you're doing. So on grade level, extra support, and think about where you can bundle. And try maybe this year not to put in those extra things that maybe are not connected to the standards, because this year we want to stay with those standards-based activities so that our students are progressing through grade level material. So
real quick, there's a question in the chat box, and it's back about the curriculum framework. Brenda, so Shauna asks, will economics information be added to the curriculum framework sometime in the future? And then what about PFL resources?
At this particular moment, there's not a plan to add those because we're in year 2 of adding the courses that are all required. And so I am hopeful that those will happen. And we're trying to put economics information within the standards in history and government that those topics are embedded in. But at this particular moment, we don't have a plan to do an economic or PFL framework. I'm sure those are coming, just not this year. We're in year 2, so it takes a little bit of time. We're trying to catch up to all the others that have been doing this for a while. So hopefully to come, Shauna. Sorry, that may not be the exact answer you want to hear, but I do know there are economic supports within some of the history standards. For sure, and in government also. Thank you for the question. Any other questions before we move on to our effective instructional routines? It's hard to do wait time on Zoom, I found. It seems like it's longer than it is. But still, Jason's helping me watch the chat box, so go ahead and put your question in anytime you have it. We're going to look at effective instructional routines. One of the things for social studies to keep in mind is we really want an inquiry-based approach. We want a student-centered approach and that the kids are doing social studies. And if you move down to the chart, I hope this will kind of show you what I mean by that. We have an inquiry arc in social studies, and that starts with introducing an essential question. So an essential question is going to be an overarching question that doesn't have a specific answer, that could venture over into other disciplines, into other topics. It's just a big question for kids to consider. And they want to think about that, think about their experience with that, and they might not have an experience with that. And so it's a firsthand kind of idea of what I might think about this. So an example, and we'll just take middle school right now, and I have a high school example coming. So this is 8th grade. Let's just take this question: is self-determination a basic human right? So if we're kind of talking about Western expansion, we're going to have a group of people that this is going to be an important question for. And so this is something to throw out there to start with, as does everyone. Is self-determination a basic right? And then, of course, we're going to have supporting questions and knowledge questions that go with that. So that helps us to kind of think about the overarching question. So you might think about supporting questions like, what is sovereignty? Should people be able to make their own decisions about where they live? Those are supporting questions. And then you'd also have knowledge questions about just what happened. What was the policy that required this to happen? You know, what was the time frame for this? Things like that. So what do we want kids to do with those questions? We want them to look through primary and secondary sources and find answers and evidence to back up their claims for these questions. So we've got that question technique where we've got essential questions and supporting and knowledge questions. And then we want students to be looking at primary and secondary sources. So here's an example. So if we were going to be looking at the Indian removal time period, we might look at this petition by Cherokee women. So it's a petition from women in the Cherokee Nation to the government, and it's their point of view. And so we might use a strategy like SOAPs. So if I click on this, it will take you right to the strategy for how to do that. I personally would never give my middle school or high school kids a primary source or anything without giving them something to work with, because they're going to look at a document and say, oh, I don't know what's in here, or I don't know what this says. But if you give them some kind of strategy to work with, so in SOAPs, you could put their essential question right up at the top. You could work with who's the speaker, what's the occasion, what's the audience, what's the purpose. And my favorite thing for kids to get out of this is, so what? So why is it important that I'm learning this? And how does it translate to my life today? How does it make that connection to today? And I also add another question at the bottom to ask them, if you could ask the authors of this petition a question, what would it be? What other information do you want? And so think about that with a picture or a painting or anything. What would you ask the artist or photographer or writer or speaker if you could ask them? What do you still want to know? Another way you could do this is, there's a very famous Trail of Tears mural, and you could do a sneak peek with that. And so just show one quadrant of it and let the kids kind of think about what's in this quadrant and what do you think it's going to be about, and then kind of release quadrants as you go. And the students are getting more information as you kind of unveil parts of the mural. And I wouldn't give them the title of it until you're at the end. There's also a really cool strategy called Crop It, and we've all cropped a picture. So you can use your fingers and act like you're cropping something, and you can ask them questions and you could crop it. Like you could ask them, what piece of this painting helps you understand what time period is, or what is most interesting to you or most compelling to you, and you can move around and have a discussion that way. So there are lots of ways to have discussions with written documents and with pictures. And if you were a high school teacher who was talking about assimilation, which is a little bit different topic, you could take the photo that's linked here and do a QFT strategy. So the students are asking all kinds of questions about this photo, And then they revise their questions into higher level questions, like taking the knowledge questions out. What are those questions that help us think deeply about this picture? So those are all things we want kids to do, helping to answer those questions we've given them. And then what do they do with that information once they have it? We want to see, we want them to communicate what they've learned through discussion or through something written. And so here are some examples. Once they've found that evidence, you might have a fishbowl discussion, which is a Socratic seminar for you high school teachers. Fishbowl is good for middle school and younger. And it sounds just, I mean, it's just what it sounds. You have a group in the middle and everyone's kind of watching them, so they're in the fishbowl, and they have their documents or their readings or whatever they're bringing to the circle, and they're the ones discussing the questions you've given them, and the outside circle are the ones listening, kind of writing down what they think is important that they hear, and thinking of questions to ask the inner circle, and then they can ask the inner circle once they're finished. There's all kinds of ways for the inner circle not to dominate time. You can give them, you know, a couple of marbles or something, and once they've put their marbles in the cup, they're done talking. You can give them a nameplate, and once they're finished talking, they turn it up, and they can't talk again till everyone's turned up. But there are ways to do that so that not one person monopolizes the discussion, and you want them using their documents. So I've heard, and I've said this myself, okay, but what did the speaker say? Or what did the document say? So that they're using that while they're talking. And so we want to see that discussion evidence-based. You can also have a dinner party or cafe conversations where you have different people from that era at a time talking about their point of view using the documents. Or you can use Raft if you would rather have them write something. And this is a great way to give student choice, because Raft is role, audience, format, and topic. So I might pick the topic for them because it might be the question we're answering, but they could have choice in how they're going to present their information. So the audience, if it's Congress, their format might be a little different than if it's their class or if it's the community. If they're writing a letter to the community or they're making a speech before Congress. So the role and the audience and the format are going to change, and you might keep that topic for what your questions are. The last part of our inquiry arc is reflection. So if you have an exit ticket for students, 3, 2, 1 is always great. The 3 things that were most important and 2 things they wonder about and 1 question they have, or any way you want to make that 3, 2, 1 work for you. I always use interactive notebooks where the kids were organizing their notes and information in a comp book. On the left-hand page of any page, they were to write reflections or questions or things they noticed about the things we were talking about. So I always had a dialogue with them, and I could see kind of what they were struggling with or what they were thinking. Or you can also do a quick write. If you have 2 minutes at the end of class and they write for 2 minutes about what they've talked about today, you know, what was the most important thing about today, and they just keep writing. They keep writing for the 2 minutes, and that will give you lots of information. And so I hope this kind of gives you some ideas of how that instructional cycle might look like. It might not happen in 1 class period. It may go over into a couple of class periods, or maybe even 3 if you have a longer thing you're working at. But this is kind of how we like to see the routine go with the inquiry learning. I know that's a lot, but I wanted to put some information in there so you could see what a lesson might look like. There's a box right here. We know that special ed students are going to be someone you're really thinking about in this time, especially if you're starting virtual learning. And so the Special Education Office has created a document just for you, for special ed students, that's very extensive with suggestions. So I would highly encourage you to go there. Same thing for our EL students. This might be a challenge if they're having to be at home for some time learning. And so these are information from our EL office also. Okay, so I'm doing a lot of talking. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. I want to go over just a couple more things quickly, and then we'll see if you have any questions after that. Some of you are going to be in blended learning, maybe.
Hold on. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Brenda. I can't tell if Tracy's talking or not in her picture. It looked like maybe she was, but she was on mute. So I just wanted to give her a chance to asking a question or making a comment.
When I share my screen, I can't see. I can only see one person.
Sure. So sorry for interrupting, but just wanted to give Tracy that
That's
chance.
Okay.
Yeah. And she's typing, so I don't know if she's just listening or. Oh, okay. She said her mom just asked her question in the background.
This happens to me all the time, Tracy. My husband comes in and has asked me a question while I'm talking, so I get it. I know some of you are going to have blended learning, maybe an AB where you're some at home and some at school, and some of you may go to school and then have to shut for a week or two. So some of the things about in-person and distance learning, even if you're not starting distance learning, remember in person, we kind of have that schedule. We know when we're going to 5th period US history. We know how long that's going to be. We know who, kind of what our materials are going to be and what our physical environment's going to be. In distance learning, you don't really know that. They're in different environments. They may have access to different materials at different times. And it may not be at 3 to 4, every day. It might be a little bit different. So just know that there's going to be a lot of grace when it comes to distance learning. In your classroom, you've had explicit instruction, you've got group work going on, you've got one-on-one things going on. We have presentations sometimes. You can still do that with distance learning. It just may look a little different. You're still going to have them doing some independent work. Hopefully there'll be some learning management system. You have Google, Canvas, something where you can at least have a chance for them to meet together sometimes. Google Slides are always a great way for them to collaborate, where they have a slide or their group has a slide that they can work with. So it may look different, but we hope those aspects are still going to be there. There's going to be asynchronous learning where they're doing it by themselves at times. And hopefully we can find those places for synchronous learning. But it may only be a couple of times a week for a shorter amount of time than you're used to. And we also have to think sometimes kids' internet crashes or their bandwidth goes away or something just doesn't work and they can't meet with you from that 2 to 3 period. So thinking about having maybe some makeup sessions where if kids have that kind of problem and it knocks them out and they can't get back in, that they don't just miss it. So having a little grace, thinking a little outside the box sometimes. In the classroom, you can have kids turning in work. They can also do things, online if you're one-to-one. It may look different in distance learning. Your feedback might have to be a video recording or an auto recording that you send them or an email instead of a one-on-one conversation. But we hope we're still communicating and still giving feedback. And every day your kids come into your classroom, you're kind of checking on them, checking on their well-being, and that probably isn't happening now. So just keep that in mind to have some little intentional check-ins with your students if they're online to make sure that they're managing their time at home. We have the social studies distance learning that we did earlier in March that has some ideas for things that the kids could do at home. And if you're in 6th grade, it has a link to the family guide for 6th grade. So don't forget, those are still there. And here's a link to those if you want to look at some of those activities that maybe if you're just home for a week because something happened, that you could use some of those activities with your kids. So one more time, going through the instructional cycle of the inquiry arc, this is kind of how you might do it in a class and how you might do it online. So thinking about an essential question again, to what extent would a government take care of its people? So going to a more high school topic. You could do a think, write, pair, share in your class where they're thinking about that. They're writing down their ideas, pairing, and then sharing. You could do that same thing on whatever learning management system your school has. So I'm not endorsing one over another. You might have Canvas, you might have Google Classroom. You could use a Google Jamboard because they can quickly put a little Post-it note up there. You could use Google Slides where they could have their own slides. So you're just going to have to think about a way for kids to still do that activity where they're thinking and sharing their information. It could be email, and then you take all of their answers together and put them in a document and then email back. So however it is in your school system, and I know your school's going to have to figure that out, but I've tried to give you several ideas of different platforms that you could use. So if we have our essential questions, some supporting questions might be, was the New Deal a good deal? What conditions set the stage for New Deal programs? What programs were needed? What positive and negative effects do you have? And if you're doing interactive notebooks or whatever you're doing in your class, you can do that same thing on your LMS, on Google Slides, Google Jamboard. If you have an interactive notebook, if you do Flipgrid where they could do videos for you, whatever it is that you have, you can use those same questions over there. And your documents, same way. If you're in the classroom, you might have a classroom set of documents where they're going through speech, or they're looking at photos or political cartoons. And I've put up several strategies, once again, that you can use. Soaps and Happy seem to be more suited for written documents, and Optic would be more for a visual. And Tacos, if you go back to what I showed you in the frameworks, Tacos is listed in there, which is my very favorite for middle school students because they're always hungry, and so they always remembered it. It was never a problem. But just giving them something to use that they can glean their information out of. And I always ask that question at the bottom. So why is this important? And what would you ask if you could ask the photographer, artist, or author? And we might not be able to find out because those people may not be living, but it kind of gives you an insight into what the students are looking at and what questions they still have about the topic you're talking about. And in your classroom, you might do a jigsaw strategy where different groups are looking at one document and then sharing with the class. You can do that same activity on your learning management system through Zoom, Google, or Google Hangouts, or whatever you're doing on the slides to collaborate with their information. They can kind of make a slide to teach everyone else, or make a recording, or make a podcast, or make a documentary, whatever it is that you think you want them to try. You can still use the same kind of things we were talking about earlier for them to discuss and write with. And also an idea maybe for them to create a campaign style commercial about their position about the role of government, which is something they might do in a job, soon. So one of the things I think about in developing something for the kids to do is what might they do in a job that might be a good skill for them to try now with the historical topic. On the right side, same things. You can still do your fishbowl discussion. It may look a lot different in that you put them in Zoom breakout rooms. And if I have 6 people, 3 are talking, 3 are listening, or 4 are talking and 2 are listening, and then they ask the questions, or a Google Hangout. Or if you have Canvas, I know Canvas has a discussion board capability, and that's really great too, kind of like a blog. Like they would put their idea in there and then people could respond. And it's the same thing as in a discussion. You just want to make sure of your instructions for how they do that. And then you can still have exit tickets. They can still do an exit ticket for you. They could email it to you. They could put it on a slide or a Jamboard or any of those things. So I hope you see that we're trying to do some of the similar things you would do in a classroom on your learning management system. It just may look a little different than how you might do it in a class. And we're still looking and listening to what kids are saying and writing all the time and making decisions as we're going. And so it's still kind of a similar idea. It just may be a discussion board, or it may be an email where they send you your work. Once again, at the bottom of this chart are just some other ideas, Seesaw and Flipgrid, and VoiceThread is also a really good tool because the kids make a PowerPoint, they put it in VoiceThread and they speak over it. And so they can put their thoughts audibly on there, and it works great. So this all seems very overwhelming to try to do this from home. iCivics is a program that has created some games for kids to play and some content for teachers to teach with civics. They have put out a toolkit for families. The thing about social studies is that everyone's experienced it. Everyone's experienced the culture or a history or a civics topic. And so involving your families in this is a great idea and a great way to help the students learn. And iCivics has created a toolkit for families just for that. Some other things that you can think about are choice boards. Having students have a voice in what they're doing and how they're showing their knowledge of the information, I think is really important. And a choice board looks like a tic-tac-toe board, and you put different activities on there, and then they will complete, you know, if they do a down or a cross, you make sure that there's maybe a smaller activity, a bigger activity, and a medium activity they can do in each row, and the kids kind of decide how they're going to show you what they learn. That's also a great way to do distance learning, where they're kind of choosing how they want to do it and then presenting you the information. If you would like to see how a school district set up distance learning, taking an inquiry arc cycle just like we've done, and how they did it over several weeks, and where it says example classrooms for distance learning, the Washington, D.C. school district was online like most of us for the last 9 weeks of school, and they created things for kids to do within the inquiry arc, still trying to keep that instructional routine. And so if you click on the high school one, you can pick your subject and kind of look at how they did that. There's one for middle school geography, and there's also an 8th grade example. So you by no means have to use these, but if you just wanted to see an example of how they kind of set theirs up, then I thought these would be helpful for you to kind of look as an example. Our wonderful and talented Karen Leonard, like we talked about earlier, our director of computer science, has created a document all on her own with digital tools. And so it gives all kinds of guidance about which tools to use, and talking about not throwing 5 or 6 at them at one time, starting with one, kind of getting used to that, and then introducing them as you go. So when you click on this, you'll be able to see all kinds of great resources from Karen. And she also talks about considering what to adopt and how to work with the information you're going to get from students and all of that. It's a great tool for thinking about how we're going to manage all of these digital tools. Okay, since I have a small audience and I'm doing a lot of the talking, does anyone have any questions, comments about things that you've already tried to use that you would suggest to others? You can either unmute and let us know, or you can put it in the chat box if you'd had a success with the digital tool. I'm going to talk while I'm watching the chat box and Jason's watching it for me. Just classroom assessment, we kind of talked about this as we went, but formative assessment is really important. And so those are checks along the way that kind of inform how you're going to present the material. And if I'm listening to a discussion and I hear students have a misconception about something, I can step in and know I maybe need to make a video for 5 minutes that kind of explains this, or I need to step into their breakout room to kind of talk about this, or they just need some more background information about something. I might need to send them some more documents to look at. And so it kind of informs your instruction. There are many ways to do that, and we've kind of talked along the way. Any of those discussion activities or writing activities or exit tickets are all part of the inquiry arc by themselves, and they all work great for formative assessment. Things you would do before you get to the very end of your unit, where that summative assessment is at the end and you can't do anything to kind of help their skill based in their knowledge. So just be thinking about that. We've talked about this along the way, but you know, social studies and literacy really are married, and they really go well together. And the kids are writing about what they're thinking, and that really helps us. And those discussions really help us kind of see where they're at. So just be thinking about formative assessments as you go. Social studies also really connects. We've talked, I think, all the way through here, Jason and Deb, about ELA. I hope you can see that it's all the way through, and they're really the same kinds of things that ELA teachers are working with their students on, is looking at, did this particular method of writing really get my point across? Did it really do what I wanted it to do? Is there bias in that? And you know, everything comes with a bias. What was the point of view? Did two different authors come to different conclusions about something, and why did they do that, and what was their thinking along the way? All those things that you do in ELA, you also do in social studies, so it really works great. We develop the same sorts of skills. We also look at a lot of data and charts and graphs to see patterns and make policy, and so we use a lot of those math skills. And if you think about science, we are looking at how technology might affect standards of living, different places and different times. And then we also, just like ELA does, we also ask kids to do things in a multimodal way. So not just reading and writing all the time, but presenting and doing things they might do in a job later. It might be a podcast. It might be a documentary they're doing. It might be a website that they're creating for this particular issue. So we want to use those technology pieces. So working a little smarter, not harder, right? Shauna, I see not overwhelming students with inquiry-based lessons. I would split them up. So maybe they're looking at just a couple of documents in this week. Like we're going to look at a document today. So you're 20 minutes today, maybe working with this one document and this one question. And, you know, maybe on Tuesday we do this, on Thursday we look at an opposing view. And so not giving them like 10 documents and saying, do all of this, today, just spreading them out. And I think if you take a look at the sample up there from the DC school district, that's kind of what they did. They had an inquiry lesson that had maybe 4 supporting questions, and they would take one question with a couple of sources and just do that for a couple of days. Like that might be their assignment for Monday through Wednesdays, just look at that. And then maybe Thursday they looked at another one, and they might have spread that out over a couple of weeks. So I think just spreading it out a little bit and not thinking that you're going to get it done like in the couple of class periods you might while you were there. And lots of times if you're giving them one document versus 3 or 4 at a time, it's easier to chunk it. Or if you have a big document, you give them half of it at a time and chunk that out where they're just looking at smaller pieces. And I always say, think about this, think about using visuals, because kids today need to be visually literate as well as reading a text, because they're getting bombarded with pictures all the time. And you definitely can use your same skills that you use with the text with a picture or a political cartoon and or a piece of art, and get some knowledge out of that. And I agree with Sherry, the jigsaw strategy is really good. If a couple of 3 students are looking at this document and a couple of 3 students are looking at the other document, and they can then report back some way on Google Slides or Jamboard or something and teach the others about what they saw. So I think that's a good way too.
I think Tracy's accidentally sending her messages, not to the whole group, but just to me. So you can click the everyone. So I just repeated it here so everyone can read that she's using and creating hyperdocs for student choice, it looks like.
That's a great suggestion, Tracy. And one of the things that we work with teachers about too is that giving the kids the documents instead of them spending hours researching for something, they can research within, and I like Padlet too. You can research within the documents that you have instead of spending hours researching and not coming up with the documents we wanted them to come up with. So Thank you for that suggestion, Tracy, a lot. Okay, very important, but I know we're kind of running to the end of our time, is social emotional learning and teacher well-being. And so you're going to be thinking about your kids' social emotional state, and there are tons of resources through here. Our counseling department has been really great about providing resources for us to look at and activities to work with kids and things you need to think about when you're thinking about the well-being of kids. And I also want you not to forget the social emotional well-being of educators. So I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. I'm going to be your mother for this minute. Okay. So here's what I want you to do. So in whatever form you like, you can grab a piece of paper, which is what I would do because I'm old school and I want to see my writing on it. You can open a note on your phone, or you can open a document on your computer. And here's what I would like you to do. So what makes you happy? What do you do that makes you happy? So if you're stressed out and you were to do this, it would make your stress less harmful to you. It would make your attitude turn. Okay. So what do you do to make yourself happy? And so one of the things I like to do, which is really hard, is go sit at the beach and listen to the waves crash, and it makes me feel really relaxed. So I can't really travel to the beach all the time, but I can do some things that might relax. So I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to watch my clock. I'm going to give you about a minute.
Brenda, my background's for you then. There you go.
Yes, thank you. It seems so calming just to go to the beach and just you put your feet in the sand and just listen to the waves, and it makes my whole attitude much better.
Yeah. I usually go through my beach withdrawals after about a year, and it's been a year. Like, I miss it. I miss it so much. So I understand completely.
And some of you may like to read or garden. So those are some other ideas. You might like to go watch a movie, rent a movie and stay, at home, or cook. I'm not one of those people that's a great cook, but you might like to cook. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do, because we're at the end of our minute. I'm going to ask you to pick a time during the week to look at this list. So if you wrote the list out, I want you to put it on your desk somewhere, pin it on your board. If you're at home, put it somewhere where you're working, and pick a day, whether it's Friday afternoon or Thursday, whenever it is, pick a day each week to look at that list and see what makes you happy, and try to accomplish one of those during the next week, because this is a new normal and we're very stressful. We're worried about our kids. We worry about them more than we worry about us sometimes. And for you to take care of your kids, you also need to take care of yourself. So I want you to think about what makes you happy, and pick a time during the week that you go back to your list. And you can remember that Brenda told you to go back to your list and look at it. And that way that you'll think about incorporating one of those things, whether it's watching a beach movie or whatever it is that can help you think about it, that you would go and do that, because you're taking care of your students and you need to be the best that you can be also. I'm going to ask Sherry if she wouldn't mind to unmute and tell us. She put in the chat about gifted students may need a little more social emotional support. Could you just speak real quick to that? Because I think that's also very important.
Yeah. So one of the good things about a lot of the distance learning for gifted students is it is very self-led. So there is that opportunity for them to kind of control their own pace, which is nice. However, we also find that gifted students will many times be perfectionists. And if something doesn't occur to them really easily, they will shut down and walk away. So having that support for those gifted students is really important, because they are also the hardest critics on themselves. So being able to provide that community, and even a Zoom, even Google Classrooms, that is our community. So utilizing those technology tools to really build that community is so important, because we want them to feel that they have that family of classroom, right? I know for my classroom, it was always, we work together, we take care of each other. And that still needs to be true, even in distance or blended learning. And I think we feel that need to kind of push through on content, but building up that community is going to be so key. So
Thank you, Sherry, for sharing that. And I would say, if you could call your students, if that's the best way to do that, them hearing your voice if they can't see you on video, because that's not possible, really makes a difference. It doesn't seem like it would, but it really does. And there are ways to, I think there are ways to get a Google phone number so that you're not using your home phone number all the time, but that you can do that and call so that it's a phone number like that. But just getting a call for you if they're not able to see you makes all the difference for students. And they're wanting to be at school too. So a lot of them are really kind of depressed about not being able to get to school and do that. And some of them are losing their things they like to do. They're not being able to go to band. They're not being able to do soccer, some of the sports, and they're losing the things that have made them happy all of this time. And so having that extra little bit of conversation and community, I think, will really help. Which actually leads us right into the next section about equity, is just thinking about not all of your families are going to respond to you in the same way. The same communication form might not work for everyone. So just thinking about having several ways of communicating. Maybe not everyone has a computer device and it's really hard to do that on your phone, or they don't have enough internet at home, that it's very spotty, and so the phone call might work, or emails. But just think about, in this situation, not having just one way to communicate, but thinking of a couple ways you can communicate so that you're being able to reach everyone is going to be really important. Once again, making sure students have access to grade level material. I know we think we need to go back and reteach, but we don't want them to get further behind. So think about doing grade level material with supports. It might take you a little longer to do this topic than usual, but you're still on grade level. You're just supporting them a little more, and you may have to give them a little bit more background knowledge in social studies to help out, or a little bit more experience in working with a skill. So just more supports. Don't just abandon the content that you're at. My library friends, media specialists, talk about mirrors and windows. And I think it's very important in social studies for students to see themselves in your instruction and your curriculum and the resources you're sharing or the books you are reading. It's important for them to see themselves as a valuable piece of that conversation. It's also important for them to window into another culture they may have never experienced, or a different point of view, or some new topic they've never thought about or studied before. It's important to do both things. So thinking about your materials, and sometimes our textbooks are not great at this, but thinking about having lots of different viewpoints so that they can mirror what they have, mirror their own experiences and view some others. Also, however you can get that discourse in, whether it's through a discussion board, email, a Google slide, if you can get on Zoom or Google Hangouts, letting them have a voice will make a lot of difference for your students, and they feel safe that they're able to express those in there. And then if you get to be in your classroom, making sure your classroom is very inclusive to all of the students that you have. So those are just some ideas, and we have lots of resources to think about on teacher reflections. There's a really great program at Harvard, the project Implicit. And then thinking about creating an anti-bias classroom. And I'm sorry, I'm scrolling but there are lots and lots of resources here. that you can take a look at for working with very difficult issues in social studies. And let's be honest, we have very controversial, difficult topics we talk about. In every era, we have them. And so one of the things I wanted to show you is that Civics has created a roadmap for teaching controversial issues. So they give you a guide for how you might structure your discussions. They also have a couple of videos to show you kind of how it might work in your classroom. So if you're kind of new to social studies or want to see how people set up their classroom and dealing with those, then the iCivics has a really great roadmap there. Okay, so I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to really quickly scroll through the safety considerations. Just remember, if you're in person, having kids with their own resources is going to be key. Having them 6 feet apart is going to be key. Always cleaning is going to be key. If your school's going to allow masks, that's also going to help. And if you think about materials, if you can drop them into a digital format into Google Classroom, or you can display them up on your projector, or you can do something to where you have their own copy of it, so that they're not spreading them around and trading them off, is other words I mean. So Carousel's always been a great, or Jigsaw's always been great. We have to think about now, not like passing all the papers around and doing that. So we kind of have to rethink that, but maybe putting them in pocket protectors where you can wipe those off, and those plastic page protectors so you can wipe those off. Might be a way to do that, or if you have a way to put them in a digital learning management system, that would be the way. Making your room for discussion is going to be really hard. They may not be facing each other in the discussion, but maybe having those spaces where they can do that will help. Maybe you can go outside a day. Maybe there's an opportunity to go outside and be outside where you could do your discussion out there. And so it's have a little bit more ventilation. And of course your school's gonna limit guests and traffic flow and things like that. So that's always gonna be important. Before we get out of here, I wanted to show you that we're here for you. In the ongoing support at the top, you can sign up for the Social Studies newsletter. There's also a link to the Social Studies website that also has the newsletter posted on there, plus other resources. I have listed several professional learning opportunities that are online that you can watch. They're PD opportunities. The Social Studies Department, hosts a virtual meeting every first Tuesday of the month from 4 to 5, and teachers get together and we talk about usually a topic, or sometimes we just share ideas for how things are going. For geography teachers, we also have a PD the second Tuesday of every month, and OCAGE, the Oklahoma Alliance for Geographic Education. Since we kind of had shut down on PD, this is their way of kind of sharing the resources they have out with people through our monthly meetings. Here are all kinds of social media connections. If you're interested in social media, we are very blessed in Oklahoma to have so many social studies organizations that help out with resources, with things they've posted online for teachers, with PD they've been able to offer, and opportunities for teachers. So the Oklahoma Council for Social Studies has a website that has tons of things on it. They also will have a virtual conference in October. The Oklahoma Council for History Education has a website, and I know they're also looking at some virtual things. The Oklahoma Alliance for Geographic Education has a website with all kinds of lessons and ideas, and they also are looking to do some virtual PD. And then the Oklahoma Council on Economic Education also has a website. And if you notice up in the social media connections, they all have a Facebook page and they all have a Twitter account. And so I've linked all those for you. We also have an Oklahoma Social Studies. If you go OKSS on Facebook, click that. That's a closed group of social studies teachers. And so they share sometimes what resources they're using or strategies they're using. And books they're using. So it's a really great resource also. And the Sooner Girls 1967 is me on Twitter. And so you can follow me, and I try to share. And when I see really great resources, I try to share that out. You can always, of course, email me at the bottom anytime. We're working from home. So emailing is the best way to get a hold of us at the moment, and we can get right back to you. So I feel like because we had such a small group, I did all of the talking, which I don't like to do, but I hope this document will be helpful to you. It's right at 5 o'clock, so I'm going to say thank you for spending some of your August day with us. I know we're getting, some of you have already started back to school. My husband had kids today, so if you have any more questions, you can put them in the chat box, or I'll hang around a minute and you can unmute and ask. But I appreciate you attending and hope to see you at one of our virtual meetings soon.